The bullet hit the 10-year-old before it sounded. She couldn't hear the warning. She couldn't scream. But her father, a ghost in the system, heard everything. And he was coming. The shot didn't echo. It was absorbed by the humid North Carolina air, a violent punctuation mark in a lazy afternoon. It landed inside the chest of a girl who couldn't even hear it coming. 10-year-old Ava Ellis had just been tracing the outline of a star on the cover of her worn copy of The Little Prince. Her fingers, small and delicate, were still hovering over the faded gold foil when the bullet struck. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Her small body was thrown backward by the force, a marionette with its strings cut. The light blue t-shirt she wore, decorated with a hand-drawn planet and a single rose, began to bloom with a dark, impossible red. It spread from her heart like a time-lapse video of a dying flower. Her backpack, heavy with books and dreams, slid from her shoulder. The copy of The Little Prince fell from her grasp, hitting the concrete steps of the Sterling Creek Community Library with a soft thud. It slid open, its pages fluttering in the breeze, revealing the margins filled with her own drawings. Little sketches of talking foxes, of proud roses under glass domes, of a small boy sweeping out volcanoes on a distant asteroid. She had drawn herself into the story. A small black girl with bright eyes and 2 hearing aids, standing beside the prince, teaching him how to sign the word friend. She was one of them, a dreamer, an explorer of worlds unseen, until she wasn't. A second shot cracked the air. This one missed, gouging a chunk of concrete from the step just inches from her head. It was a mistake trying to erase a mistake. Officer Nolan Vance stood with his gun still raised, his eyes wide but unblinking, a mask of disbelief hardening into something uglier. His partner, a younger officer named Miller, shoved him hard in the chest. "Jesus, Nolan, stand down. She's down, she's down." Vance's voice was a ragged tear in the sudden silence. She wasn't responding. Her hands, she was making gestures. Threatening gestures. She was signing, "You damn fool." The shout came from across the street. A woman in a baker's apron, her hands dusted with flour, rushed out from the Daily Bread cafe, holding her phone up, the red out of the recording button already glowing. "That's Ava. She's deaf. You just shot a deaf child, you monster." Vance started to turn toward the woman, his weapon still forward, but Miller grabbed his arm, pulling him back. She matched the description. Vance snapped, his eyes darting around, searching for justification in the horrified faces of the gathering onlookers. Black female, erratic behavior. She had a book. The baker screamed, her voice cracking with fury. She wasn't erratic. She was reading. I see her every single day. She sits on those steps and signs the stories to herself. You just didn't bother to understand. On the pavement, Ava's hand twitched once. It wasn't a gesture of defiance or fear. It was the final, fading static of a nervous system trying to remember if it was still allowed to exist. She didn't hear the chaos erupting around her, the symphony of sirens that now screamed louder than she ever could. But her body felt the vibrations through the concrete. The running feet, the slamming car doors, the low thrum of a world tilting off its axis. A mother on a nearby bench grabbed her toddler and fled. A teenager on a skateboard froze, his board clattering to the ground. An elderly man, sitting in his car, fumbled with his phone to dial 911, not realizing the very people he was calling were the ones who had just fired the shots. Ava's left cochlear implant, a small, beige device, had been knocked loose by the fall. It skittered across the pavement, coming to rest near a crack in the sidewalk. It buzzed faintly once, a tiny, unheard protest, and then its indicator light went dark. And deep beneath a sprawling, nondescript data center in Maryland, over 500 miles away, a sensor no larger than a quarter blinked to life on a black server rack. It had been dormant for 3 years, a silent promise in a sea of silent data. Until now, a single line of encrypted text appeared on a locked monitor. Guardian Protocol. Active. Marcus Ellis was mid-sentence, outlining a flaw in a next-generation encryption algorithm, when his earpiece emitted a single, sharp tone. It wasn't a notification. It was a summons. the kind of sound that wasn't supposed to exist in his new life. He didn't flinch. He didn't pause to ask for clarification. He simply straightened his back, closed the laptop in front of him, and slid his ID badge, a fake one for Shell Corporation, off the lanyard around his neck, placing it deliberately on the polished mahogany table. The other 3 people in the subterranean conference room, all brilliant minds in the world of cybersecurity, fell silent. The director of the think tank, a man named Elias Vance, no relation to the officer, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Marcus? Something wrong. Family emergency," Marcus said. The words were calm, measured, and absolutely final. "We're in the middle of a critical debrief," Elias pressed, a hint of annoyance in his tone. "It's not negotiable," Marcus replied, his voice dropping half an octave, carrying a weight that made the air in the room feel heavy. He stood up and walked out without a backward glance. The silence he left behind was more profound than his presence had been. 10 minutes later, a flight plan was logged, but not under his real name. The aircraft wasn't commercial. It had no manifest, no insignia, just a sleek, black Bombardier Challenger jet lifting off from a private airfield outside Baltimore, ascending into the light cloud cover, its destination listed as a private airstrip in rural North Carolina. He didn't pack a bag. He didn't need one. Everything he had been, was already with him. He was Marcus Ellis, a man who had officially died in a car accident 3 years ago. Before that, he was the ghost in the machine, the lead architect of the NSA's most sophisticated and controversial cyber warfare programs. He built systems that could dismantle a nation's power grid from a keyboard, that could listen to whispers in fortified bunkers, that could make people, records, and entire histories disappear. He had walked away from it all after his wife, Serena, died, trading a world of shadows for a quiet life of pancakes, bedtime stories, and the singular, brilliant light of his daughter, Ava. He had built one last system before he vanished. A system for one person. A promise. The Guardian Protocol. Back in Sterling Creek, paramedics were a whirlwind of frantic, controlled motion around Ava's small form. Her vitals were a faint, flickering signal. One EMT applied pressure to the wound, his gloves slick with blood. Another worked to start in 4-line in her slender arm. A third cursed under his breath as the sterile gauze turned crimson the moment it touched her skin. "She's just a kid," one of them whispered, the words lost in the wail of the sirens. "Where's the family?" Nothing listed but a single emergency contact. Marcus Ellis. That name made Dr. Anya Sharma, the attending trauma surgeon at Sterling Creek General, stop cold as she met the gurney at the emergency bay doors. "You said Marcus Ellis?" The nurse, reading from a tablet, nodded. "That's what's in the school's system." "It's probably not him." "It can't be," Dr. Sharma whispered to herself, but her hands had already begun to tremble as she pulled on her surgical gloves. She'd heard the name before, during her residency in D.C. It was spoken in hushed tones in conversations about NSA black sites and intelligence ghosts. The kind of man whose name you didn't say out loud unless you were prepared to deal with the consequences. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Nolan Vance sat in the passenger seat of his patrol car, his fingers twitching against the grip of his service weapon. "She didn't stop," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on nothing. "You didn't give her a chance to understand," Officer Miller retorted, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and disgust. Vance didn't reply. Miller stared at him, the flashing blue and red lights painting his partner's face in demonic hues. "They got video. That woman from the bakery was recording." Vance's throat worked, a dry swallow. "She didn't listen. I gave a command. I said stop. She couldn't hear you, Nolan." Vance just stared forward as more squad cars arrived, their sirens joining the chorus of a tragedy already in progress. The town was beginning to stir. Rumors, carried by text messages and social media posts, were hardening into shouts. Teenagers poured out of the nearby high school. Someone spray-painted hashtag Justice for Ava on the library wall. A small crowd of protesters began to gather before the mayor had even received her first official update. And somewhere in the sky, Marcus Ellis sat in the silent cabin of the jet, reviewing a dossier on his daughter's cochlear implant. The device that triggered the alert wasn't just a medical tool. It was a vessel. After Serena died, he had modified it himself, embedding a microsensor linked to an encrypted server he had built from scratch. It was designed to activate on a catastrophic impact or the cessation of vital signs. He had sworn to himself he would never need it. That oath had expired the moment the bullet struck his daughter. On the tarmac just outside of Sterling Creek, the jet touched down without ceremony. No escort, no welcome wagon. Marcus stepped off wearing simple jeans and a dark gray hoodie, a nondescript backpack slung over his shoulder. A civilian on the outside, a weapon beneath the surface. Two figures emerged from the shadows of a hangar to meet him. "You were quiet on the flight," said Maya, a woman with sharp eyes and a laptop bag that was likely more dangerous than a crate of grenades. "I was calculating," Marcus replied, his voice flat and cold. Ben, a broad-shouldered man whose calm demeanor did little to hide the fact that he could dismantle a small army with his bare hands, nodded grimly. "Hospital's on lockdown. She's alive. Barely. Cops are already spinning the story." Marcus looked up at the darkening North Carolina sky. The edges of the clouds painted a bruised orange and purple. It couldn't decide between hope and grief. "Then we burn their version," he said, his voice a low promise of devastation. "Every lie, every report, every file. They don't get to hide from this." The trauma base smelled of antiseptic, copper, and rising panic. Dr. Anya Sharma pulled on her gloves, her movements precise and automatic, a stark contrast to the storm raging in her mind. The girl on the gurney was so small, almost lost amidst the tangle of tubes and wires. Pale, barely breathing. 10 years old, the paramedic confirmed, his voice strained. Single gunshot wound to the upper chest. Suspected profound hearing impairment. No guardian on site. Dr. Sharma stared at the child's face for a beat too long. She was just a baby. Her braids were half undone. Her lips were chapped. It was the kind of stillness that never belonged in a child. A quiet stolen, not chosen. "Vitals," she snapped, her professional focus taking over. "Systolic is dropping, pulse is thready." She coded once in the ambulance, but we got her back. "We're pushing fluids and O negative." A nurse handed Dr. Sharma the intake chart on a tablet. One emergency contact listed, Marcus Ellis. Her hands froze mid-motion. The name meant nothing to the nurses and paramedics buzzing around her, but to her, it was like a ghost story told by intelligence analysts over late-night coffee in D.C. A name that was officially a ghost. Marcus Ellis, she repeated, the name tasting foreign and dangerous. The paramedic shrugged. "That's what the system says." Dr. Sharma didn't reply. She just looked back at Ava and whispered under her breath, "Who in God's name are you, kid?" The girl's hand twitched, a tiny, involuntary reflex. Or maybe something more. "Page cardio and prep for trauma surgery now," Dr. Sharma ordered, her voice ringing with authority. "And someone get security to lock this floor down. If that name is who I think it is, this little girl won't be our only guest tonight." Marcus never used the front door. He didn't need to. At 2:14 a.m., a service entrance at the rear of Sterling Creek General Hospital clicked open. A stolen janitor's ID badge, cloned and printed in the back of a van minutes earlier, had granted him access. His eyes, unreadable in the dim light, scanned the corridor. Ben met him just past the industrial laundry chutes, appearing as if from the wall itself. "4th floor, surgical ICU. She's still in surgery. You good?" "No," Marcus said, the single word carrying the weight of a collapsing world. "You?" Ben shook his head, his expression grim. "Worse." Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. He moved with the quiet, unnerving confidence of a man who had already mapped the hospital schematics in his mind long before he ever needed them. Maya followed a few paces behind, her boots silent on the linoleum, the hood of her sweatshirt pulled up, a flash drive already spinning between her nimble fingers. They didn't speak in the service elevator. They didn't need to. By the time the doors opened on the 4th floor, Marcus had already slipped past 2 nurses' stations and was standing in front of a maintenance kiosk, its screen glowing faintly. He pried open the panel beneath it, revealing a tangle of wires. He located an unused terminal port and plugged in a small device from his pocket. 60 seconds later, Maya was patched into the hospital's internal network from her tablet. "Security logs are a joke," she muttered, her fingers flying across the virtual keyboard. No two-factor authentication on their admin portal. God, these people have no idea what encryption even means. Marcus barely glanced over, his attention fixed on the double doors leading to the operating rooms. "Find me the law enforcement interface. Dispatch logs, flagged reports, any federal cross notifications." Already on it. Ben leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a seemingly relaxed posture that was anything but. His eyes never stopped scanning the hallway, missing nothing. "You think it was a panic shot? An accident?" Marcus shook his head slowly, a barely perceptible movement. "Nothing about this smells like panic. Panic is messy. This feels intentional." In operating room 2, Ava's life was being held together by skill, steel, and sutures. Her vitals were stabilizing, but her breathing was shallow. A nurse passed quietly outside the OR, then paused, glancing toward the strange, silent trio in the hallway. She didn't recognize Marcus. He didn't blink, his gaze passing right through her. Unsettled, she moved on. Maya's fingers suddenly stopped. "Okay, this is weird." "What?" Marcus's voice was sharp. "There's number 911 call," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. Marcus turned his full attention to her. "Explain." "There's no emergency report filed. Not from a civilian. Not even an anonymous tip. The first radio traffic from Vance's unit doesn't happen until after the first shot was fired." Marcus stared at the screen, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. "Then why were they there?" Maya's fingers moved again, diving deeper into the system, bypassing firewalls with practiced ease. She pulled up a secondary folder, one that had been manually archived. "There's a flag. An internal alert sent from inside the Sterling Creek Police Department. Time-stamped 6 minutes before the shooting." She read the details aloud, her voice laced with disbelief. "Subject, black female, juvenile. Possible erratic behavior. Location, community library. Behavioral flag, unrecognized hand motions. Recommendation, approach with extreme caution." Ben straightened up from the wall. "Unrecognized hand motions? Are you kidding me?" She was signing. Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "An AI system flagged her?" Ben asked. "No," Maya replied, her eyes wide as she traced the origin of the flag. "This wasn't the AI. The flag came from a physical terminal. Manually logged in. Someone typed this in themselves." "Ooh." Maya pulled up the metadata, the digital fingerprint of the user. "Terminal 7. Logged in as D-Cross." She cross-referenced the name. "Captain Dominic Cross." Marcus exhaled slowly, a sound like grinding stone. His fingers tightened into fists at his sides. "He hunted her." Maya's voice dropped to a whisper. "He used the system as a cover, but this wasn't predictive policing. This was targeted. He sent Vance and Miller there with a loaded narrative before they even saw her." She looked at Marcus, her expression a mixture of horror and fury. "Marcus, they weren't on patrol. They were sent." "Wait," Ben interjected. "I thought Cross was internal affairs." "He was," Marcus said, his memory, a finely honed weapon, accessing a file he thought he'd buried long ago. "Before Sterling Creek, he was at Atlanta PD, transferred out after a major excessive force investigation. It disappeared mid-review. Guess where they reassigned him?" Maya's fingers were already flying, pulling up personnel files. "He's attached to a new pilot program. OmniGuard Solutions, Aegis Protocol. Behavioral modeling, predictive threat indexing, it's AI." Ben leaned over her shoulder. "You're telling me they're using a beta-level AI to scan children in a public library and justify lethal force?" "No," Marcus said, his eyes fixed on the doors, as if he could see his daughter through the steel. "They're not scanning. They're labeling. And then they wait for someone to pull the trigger." Maya found a final piece of the puzzle. A training document linked to Captain Cross's credentials. It stated the Aegis protocol was approved for discretionary field deployment by city leadership. No council vote, no public oversight. Just a single signature. Mayor Diana Vance. Ben cursed under his breath. Marcus didn't speak. He was staring at the screen as if it had personally betrayed him. She wasn't even doing anything, Maya said, her voice rising with indignation. She was reading a book. She was signing to herself. That's it. She fit the threat profile, Marcus replied, his voice devoid of all emotion. Black, young, disabled, alone. And worst of all, to them, unreadable. They were silent for a moment. The hum of the hospital the only sound. Marcus turned to face the operating room window. Through the frosted glass, he could see the silhouette of Dr. Sharma's hands, stained with his daughter's blood, moving with determined purpose. He closed his eyes. Serena's face flashed in his mind, her voice echoing from a memory he hadn't touched in years. They don't fear our anger, Marcus. They fear our clarity, our ability to name exactly what they're trying to hide. He opened his eyes. We name it all, he said. Every file, every flag, every secret order. Maya stood up, her tablet held tightly in her hand. Then we go to war. Marcus nodded. Not loud. Not yet. First we dig. Then we make them explain it to the world. Ben looked at the silhouette of the small girl in the room beyond the glass. She's just a kid, Marcus. Marcus's voice was as steady and as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. She's not just anything. And deep inside the Sterling Creek Police Department, behind a locked server cabinet labeled "Do Not Touch," a small indicator light flickered from green to red. It was a heartbeat, a warning, and a countdown. Captain Dominic Cross liked his office cold. The air conditioning was always cranked to a level that made civilians shiver, a subtle assertion of control. He sat behind a large, sterile desk of dark wood and brushed steel, a monument to order in a world he saw as chaotic. Cross was a man who believed in systems, in data, and in the clean, unambiguous lines of authority. He saw human behavior as a series of predictable, and therefore controllable, inputs and outputs. Emotion was a variable that needed to be eliminated. He was reviewing the preliminary incident report on his monitor, his expression unreadable. The official narrative was already taking shape. Officer Vance, a veteran with a commendable record, had encountered a non-compliant individual matching the description of a person flagged for erratic behavior. The individual made sudden, threatening hand gestures. The officer, fearing for his safety, acted according to his training. It was clean. It was defensible. It was a lie. His desk phone buzzed, a discreet internal chime. He glanced at the caller ID, Mayor Vance. He let it ring twice before answering. Another small exercise in power. Cross. Dominic. What in God's name is happening? Mayor Diana Vance's voice was a tight wire of controlled panic. I have a national news call in my personal cell. They're talking about a 10-year-old girl. The situation is under control, Mayor, Cross said, his tone placid, reassuring. Officer Vance followed the protocol. The Aegis system flagged a potential threat, and he responded. A threat? She was a child with a book, and she was deaf, Dominic. Deaf. Those are details that are still being confirmed. Cross lied smoothly. What is confirmed is that the system worked. It identified a behavioral anomaly, and our officer intercepted before the situation could escalate. Escalate? He shot her. This is not what you promised me. You said the Aegis protocol would be a quiet deterrent. You said it would lower crime stats and make the city look good. This is a catastrophe. Cross leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning softly. Every new system has a calibration period, Diana. This is an unfortunate, but manageable outlier. The officer's body cam footage was unfortunately corrupted during the transfer. A technical glitch. It's his word against a baker with a cell phone. We control the narrative. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The company, she said, her voice dropping. What does OmniGuard say? They stand by their product, Cross said. And by us. Their legal team is already drafting a statement of support for the department. He didn't mention that he had spent the last hour on the phone with OmniGuard CEO, the mayor's husband, coordinating that very statement. This was the true nature of the system. The Aegis protocol wasn't just a piece of software. It was a partnership, a lucrative one. OmniGuard Solutions, a company with deep ties to the private prison industry, had given the system to Sterling Creek for free as a pilot program. In return, they got real-world data to refine their product, a glowing case study from a grateful city, and a direct line to the city's lucrative public safety and education budgets. Mayor Vance had personally championed the deal, using a little-known emergency public safety clause in the city charter to bypass the city council and any public debate. It was a closed loop of power and profit, and Captain Cross was its gatekeeper. He had come from Atlanta PD under a cloud of suspicion, a decorated officer with a history of aggressive enforcement in minority communities. He wasn't punished. He was relocated, promoted, and given a powerful new tool. He saw the Aegis Protocol as the culmination of his life's work. It wasn't about predicting crime. It was about enforcing conformity. The algorithm, which he had helped OmniGuard's engineers design, was coded with his biases. It flagged subjects who didn't walk a certain way, who lingered too long, who gathered in groups of more than 3. And it had a specific, heavily weighted variable for unrecognized rapid hand gestures. A category so broad it could mean anything from an argument to a seizure to a child signing a story to herself. It was a system designed to see threats where there were none. It was designed to find Ava. In the hospital's makeshift command center, a vacant on-call room on the 4th floor, Maya stared at her screen, her face illuminated by lines of code. "I'm in." "In where?" Ben asked, standing guard by the door. "OmniGuard's corporate servers," she said with a grim smile. "Their firewalls are better than the hospital's, but they're built to keep out corporate rivals, not ghosts." Marcus stood over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the data as it streamed onto the screen. "What have you found?" "The source code for the Aegis Protocol." Cross wasn't just a user, Marcus. He was a consultant. He helped them build the threat matrix. She pointed to a section of the code, highlighted in red. Variable Cluster 7. Non-compliant kinesics. It assigns threat scores to body language. And look at this. She zoomed in on a comment left by one of the programmers. Per Captain Cross, assign elevated weight to nonverbal communication in designated at-risk demographic profiles. Manual override recommended for confirmation. He didn't just find her by accident, Ben said, his voice low and angry. He built the net that caught her. "It's worse," Maya said, her fingers flying as she cross-referenced the code with city contracts. "Mayor Vance didn't just sign off on the pilot program. She's the reason it's here." She pulled up a document, a signed letter of intent between the mayor's office and OmniGuard Solutions. It promised OmniGuard exclusive bidding rights on a future citywide surveillance contract, valued at $50 million, contingent on the successful field trial of the Aegis Protocol. Successful field trial. Marcus repeated, the words tasting like ash. "That's what my daughter is to them. A data point." Maya kept digging. "There's a financial link. Mayor Vance's husband, Richard Vance, isn't just on the board of OmniGuard. He's a majority shareholder. He founded the damn company." The pieces clicked into place, forming a sickening mosaic of greed, power, and corruption. This wasn't about public safety. It was a product demonstration. Ava wasn't the target. She was the advertisement. She was proof that the system worked, that it could identify and neutralize a threat that no one else had even seen. "They're all connected," Ben murmured. "The cop, the captain, the mayor, the company." Marcus stared at the screen, at the names and the lines of code that had converged to put a bullet in his daughter's chest. He felt a familiar coldness seep into his bones, the detached, analytical calm that had made him one of the most dangerous men in the world. He had built systems like this once, for a different kind of war. He knew their language, their architecture, their weaknesses. "Maya," he said, his voice quiet but sharp. "I want everything. Every email, every financial transaction, every encrypted call between all of them. I want to know what they had for breakfast. I want the architecture of their entire lives." Maya looked up at him, a flicker of concern in her sharp eyes. "Marcus, what are you planning?" "They built a system to hunt my daughter," he said, turning his gaze back toward the hallway that led to the ICU. "I'm going to build one that dismantles theirs, piece by piece." Marcus sat in a plastic chair beside his daughter's hospital bed. He had traded the stolen janitor's uniform for scrubs, blending in with the quiet hum of the ICU. The room was a symphony of soft, rhythmic beeps, each one a fragile confirmation that Ava was still with him. She lay perfectly still, a small form lost in the starched, white landscape of the bed. Wires snaked across her chest, their colors a stark contrast to her brown skin. Gauze and tape held a network of tubes in place, feeding medicine and oxygen into a body fighting a war on the inside. Her face was pale beneath the soft glow of the monitors. Her lips were cracked. A shallow, machine-assisted rise and fall of the blanket over her chest was the only sign of the fierce battle for life happening within. She hadn't moved since the surgery, not even a twitch. But her heart was beating. It was a tiny, persistent drumbeat in the overwhelming silence, and Marcus held on to it like a soldier gripping his last canteen of water in the desert. He hadn't spoken since he entered the room hours ago. He just sat, one hand wrapped gently around hers, feeling the impossible softness of her fingers. His other hand rested on the edge of the bed, a silent, unmoving guardian. His back was straight, his posture rigid. His eyes, hollowed out by grief and rage, were locked on his daughter's face. He was a statue carved from pain. It had been this way once before. Serena had died in silence, too. The memories came without warning, sharp and cruel as shrapnel. One minute he was watching the green line of Ava's heartbeat flicker on a monitor. The next he was standing on the shoulder of a rain-slicked highway in Maryland. He was watching men in uniforms scribble notes and take photos of a burned-out sedan. They made no arrests. They asked few questions. Serena Ellis had been a warrior in a pantsuit, a brilliant, fierce legal aid lawyer who dedicated her life to fighting for those the system was designed to crush. She had learned to sign fluently before Ava was even born, determined that her daughter's world would begin with the language of complete understanding, not the frustration of silence. Her last case had been a lawsuit against the local sheriff's department. A deputy had slammed a nonverbal autistic teenager against a locker for failing to comply with verbal commands. The boy's arm was broken. The deputy claimed he was resisting arrest. Serena had fought them for 6 months, burying them in motions and depositions. She won. The county settled, and the deputy was fired. The report was clean. The system had, for once, worked. 2 weeks later, Serena's brake lines were cut. They called it mechanical failure. The official report cited corrosion and wear. The insurance company agreed. Marcus did not. He had hunted the man responsible himself, using the skills he was supposed to have left behind. He found the ex-deputy in a bar 2 states away, bragging about rich lawyers who get what they deserve. But justice wasn't built for ghosts. And Marcus had spent his career building the very systems that made men like him disappear. No court would listen to a man whose job title had never officially existed. No judge would admit surveillance logs that weren't supposed to be real. So Marcus did what ghosts do best. He vanished. He took his daughter and disappeared into a quiet life in a quiet town, far from the black sites and the echo chambers of national security briefings. He became a father who made pancakes on Saturdays, a man who could braid hair and build elaborate Lego castles, a man who never, ever raised his voice. He became a shadow clinging to the only light he had left. But now, the shadows had come for his light. And this time, he wasn't hiding. Maya's voice buzzed softly through the tiny, flesh-colored earpiece hidden in his ear. "I'm in the precinct's internal servers," she said. "They're already trying to spin it." The preliminary report from Officer Vance claims she failed to comply and then charged at him. No mention of her hearing impairment. Marcus didn't respond. He just squeezed Ava's hand, as if he could pour his own strength into her. "Marcus," Maya pressed gently. "She signs when she's happy," he finally said, his voice a raw whisper. "And when she's scared, it calms her." Ben's voice came in next, a deep, steady anchor. She was doing it that day. We confirmed it from the bakery's video. Her hands were up. She was signing something from her book. She didn't even see them coming. Marcus murmured, his gaze tracing the curve of Ava's cheek. They didn't wait for her to speak. Silence filled the line. After a beat, Maya's voice cracked slightly. They didn't see her, Marcus. Not really. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the world was quiet but not asleep. News vans were beginning to line the street, near the emergency entrance like vultures. Police cars were parked in a protective loop around the hospital. He could feel the low hum of denial and manufactured narratives building from the precinct, a static charge before a storm. They didn't need to see her, Marcus said, his voice hardening. She was already a threat the moment they couldn't read her. Difference is danger in their world. It always has been. Are we leaking the files yet? Ben asked. No, Marcus said. We don't light the match until we've soaked the entire house in gasoline. Behind him, Ava's monitor beeped, a steady, fragile rhythm. He turned back to her. Her face was so much like Serena's, the same determined set of her jaw, even in unconsciousness. She didn't just read about heroes, she believed in them. Her copy of The Little Prince was filled with her own additions to the story, where the pilot learned to sign and the Rose learned that love didn't need words. And now those pages were stained with her blood. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver pendant, a simple disc tarnished with time. On it were engraved the words, "Listen with your heart." It had been Serena's. He had kept it all these years, tucked away in a locked box, a relic of a life he had buried. But it wasn't just grief he had buried. It was purpose. The part of himself that had once believed the system could be hacked, bent, made better. He gently tucked the pendant into Ava's hand, closing her small fingers around it. You held up your hands to tell a story, he whispered, his voice cracking. And they made it a crime. He turned away before the tears could surface, his jaw tight. On the earpiece, Maya's voice came back, urgent. Marcus, you're going to want to hear this. What is it? I found a folder. It's not encrypted, but it's buried deep in their local server. Internal comms between Officer Vance and Captain Cross. There's a full audio string from their encrypted messaging app, from right after the shooting. Play it. She did. Vance's voice came first, distorted by panic and agitation. She was just flailing her hands. I thought she had something. I thought she was signaling someone. Then came Cross's reply. Calm, cold, emotionless. You followed protocol, Nolan. Just stay quiet. Let die down. The narrative is under control. Marcus's jaw tightened until it ached. Save it. Triple backup. Off-grid servers. We use it when it will hurt them the most. What's the move, Marcus? Ben asked. He looked at Ava, at her still chest, her scraped knuckles, the bandage rising and falling with the help of a machine. We start making noise. The oxygen machine hissed softly, the only sound breaking the silence. Marcus stepped outside the room, closing the door gently behind him. A nurse passed by, clutching a tray, offering him a sympathetic, unknowing smile. They didn't recognize him. He wasn't supposed to exist. But in that moment, every camera in that hospital, every badge scanner, every unsecured Wi-Fi network was already his. The ghost was back. And this time, he wasn't walking alone. The hallway outside ICU room 4 was quiet in that sterile, heavy way that only hospitals can perfect. Marcus sat on the edge of a bench next to a humming vending machine, listening. Not for footsteps, not for voices. For a signal. Maya's voice crackled into his earpiece, sharp and clear. I found it. Marcus stood, moving casually toward the stairwell door, his movements fluid and unremarkable. Found what? An internal thread, encrypted text syncs, and voice notes between Vance and Cross. There's a voice note from Vance, sent about an hour after the shooting. He's panicking. Marcus paused in the shadows of the concrete stairwell landing. Play it. A slight buzz, then static. Vance's voice came through, ragged and uncertain. She was just a kid, Captain. She had a book. Everyone saw it. That woman from the bakery, she was recording. I think I messed up. Then came Cross's reply, a separate voice note, his tone measured, devoid of any emotion. You followed protocol, Nolan. The system flagged a threat. You neutralized it. The body cam footage is corrupted. It's your word against theirs. Stick to the report. Let die down. There was a pause. Then Cross's voice returned, colder still. And delete this conversation. Silence. Marcus didn't move. He didn't curse or punch the wall. He simply closed his eyes, the audio replaying in his mind. This is what they sound like when they convince themselves they haven't just killed a child, he thought. I'm saving it to 3 off-site, air-gapped locations, Maya said, her voice tight with disgust. They tried to bury it, but they didn't dig deep enough. Catalog every name attached to that thread, Marcus commanded. I want timestamps, login locations, and all associated metadata. Already working on it, she confirmed. But Marcus, there's something else. What? Someone else is trying to access the same logs. And they're using city-level admin credentials, not police. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already knew where the next move would come from. The cover-up wasn't just happening inside the precinct. It was being directed from City Hall. 2 hours later, Marcus walked alone into the cavernous, crumbling space of an abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of Sterling Creek. The place hadn't produced a yard of fabric in 20 years. Rusting looms stood like skeletal remains in the gloom. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. The power barely worked, but someone had managed to get a few bare bulbs flickering, just enough for shadows to stay in place. Ben stood near the entrance, arms crossed, a silent, imposing sentinel. In front of him, sitting rigidly on a wooden crate, was Officer Kenji Tanaka. He was young, maybe 24, with the kind of earnest face that hadn't yet learned how to hide what he was feeling. His badge seemed too big for his chest, but his conscience was even bigger, and it was cracking. Marcus stepped into the weak circle of light. Tanaka stood up abruptly, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm before he stopped himself. I know who you are, he stammered, his voice echoing in the vast space. He didn't, not really, but he knew Marcus was the father. Marcus didn't respond. He simply sat down on another crate across from him. Tanaka clenched his fists. I was there, he said, the words rushing out. Not on patrol. I was grabbing coffee at the corner. I saw her. You saw Ava? Marcus's voice was quiet, yet it commanded the space. I saw her signing. I recognized it. My little sister, she's deaf. The admission hung in the air, heavy with shame. I should have said something. I should have walked over there. But I didn't. I froze. Marcus studied him, his gaze intense, analytical. Why? Tanaka stared at the dusty floor. Because I thought maybe they knew something I didn't. Vance is a senior officer. I thought maybe she had something. Maybe she was more than what she looked like. Marcus's eyes narrowed. She was braver than all of you combined. Tanaka nodded, shame washing over his face in a visible wave. Afterward, Cross pulled me into his office. He knew I was there. He told me not to talk. He said if I did, I'd be reassigned. Transferred to some dead-end post in the middle of nowhere. Maybe worse. And you agree? Tanaka looked up, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. I was afraid of being the one good cop who gets shot in the back by his own. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and tight, each word a carefully placed stone. You already got shot. You just don't have the scar yet. Tanaka blinked, the truth of the words hitting him. Marcus stood, then pulled a small, encrypted flash drive from his pocket and laid it on the crate between them. You can't undo what happened, but you can make sure it doesn't happen again. Tanaka hesitated, his eyes fixed on the drive. I don't know how. Give me everything, Marcus said. The real, uncorrupted body cam footage. The logs cross-deleted. The internal alerts. You've already got a copy. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. A long, tense pause stretched between them. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, Tanaka reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a tiny, plain black microSD card. I don't want to die for this, he whispered. Then don't, Marcus said, taking the card. But don't live as if it didn't happen. As Marcus turned to leave, Tanaka spoke again, his voice cracking. Tell her I'm sorry. Marcus didn't stop walking. He didn't turn around. She doesn't need your sorry, he said over his shoulder, his words echoing in the empty mill. She needs your truth. Back at the safe house, a rented, nondescript bungalow on the other side of town. The room was dark except for the glow of 3 monitors. Maya was already syncing the files from the SD card. Ben stood by the window, watching the quiet suburban street. Anything interesting? Marcus asked, his voice betraying none of the tension from the meeting. Maya let out a sharp exhale. It's worse than we thought. Marcus leaned over her shoulder. The footage from Officer Miller's body cam was there. Intact. Unedited. Maya hit play. There was no dramatic music. No commentary. Just a shaky, first-person view of a world about to break. Ava walked slowly past the library, her blue t-shirt a bright spot of color. Her fingers moved through the air like a poet's, graceful and expressive. She's signing a song, Maya whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Then, from off-camera, Vance's voice screamed, "Stop moving. Show me your hands." Ava turned slightly, a look of confusion on her face. Her hands, which were already up, simply continued their gentle, rhythmic motion. Then the shot. Her body crumpled. Her book tumbled down the steps. Ben turned away from the screen, his jaw clenched. Marcus didn't blink. "How long from the command to the shot?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Maya checked the time code. 4.7 seconds. "That's not a reaction," Marcus said. "That's an execution." He straightened up. "What do we do now?" "We let them see what silence really looks like." At exactly 12:01 a.m., Maya uploaded the clip to a private, encrypted server. From there, it was mirrored to 8 secure backups and dropped into the inboxes of several trusted independent journalists and civil rights organizations. There was a single instruction attached. No edits. No voiceover. No commentary. Just the truth. It hit the public timeline at 12:03 a.m. By 12:07, it had 40,000 views. By 12:10, the hashtag Mayans are not a threat was trending nationwide. The world watched a 10-year-old child get shot for signing a lullaby. And this time, they couldn't look away. The abandoned textile mill felt like a tomb. Dust motes danced like ghosts in the slivers of moonlight piercing through the grimy, broken windows. Marcus stood in the shadows, a silhouette against the rusting hulk of a forgotten loom. The only sound was the drip of water from the leaking roof, each drop a tick of a clock counting down. Officer Kenji Tanaka arrived alone, just as Ben had predicted. He walked into the cavernous main floor, his footsteps echoing, his hand resting nervously on the butt of his holstered pistol. He looked small and out of place, a man drowning in a uniform that was supposed to make him feel powerful. "You're the father," Tanaka said, his voice shaky. It wasn't a question. Marcus stepped out of the shadows. He didn't confirm or deny. He just watched, his face an unreadable mask. "You saw what happened." Tanaka flinched. "I was getting coffee. I saw her on the library steps. I saw her signing." He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the silence. "My sister, she's deaf. I recognized it. She was just being a kid." "And you did nothing," Marcus stated, his voice flat, devoid of accusation, but heavy with the weight of fact. "Vance is a senior officer," Tanaka said, the excuse sounding weak even to his own ears. I didn't know. I froze." He looked down at his polished black shoes, unable to meet Marcus's gaze. "When I heard the shot, you ran," Marcus finished for him. "You got in your car and you drove away." Tanaka's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and shame. "How did you?" "I know because it's what a scared man does," Marcus said, taking a step closer. "And right now, you are the most scared man in Sterling Creek. You're not scared of me. You're not even scared of Cross. You're scared of the man you see in the mirror every morning. The one who knows his sister would be ashamed of him." The words hit Tanaka like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his face crumbling. "You don't know anything about my sister." "I know she's brave," Marcus countered, his voice dropping, becoming almost gentle, which was somehow more terrifying. "I know she has to navigate a world that wasn't built for her every single day. She has to be a warrior just to be understood. My wife, Serena, she was a warrior like that too. She was a lawyer. She fought for people the world tried to silence. She fought a sheriff's department for what they did to an autistic boy, and she won. 2 weeks later, she was dead. They called it an accident." He let the story hang in the air between them, a chilling testament to the cost of speaking up. "She used to say that silence in the face of injustice isn't neutrality. It's a choice. It's betrayal. You made a choice that day, Officer Tanaka. Now you have another one to make. Tears were now streaming down Tanaka's face. He wiped them away angrily with the back of his hand. What do you want from me? Cross will destroy me. They'll say I'm a traitor. They'll ruin my career, my life. Your life is already ruined, Marcus said, his voice hardening again. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet. You'll see that little girl's face every time you close your eyes. You'll hear that shot every time a car backfires. You'll see your sister's disappointment in every face that looks at you. At the prison, no bars can match. He pulled a small, encrypted flash drive from his pocket and held it out. I'm offering you a key, not to escape, but to atone. Give me the uncorrupted body cam footage, the real logs, everything Cross tried to bury. Tanaka stared at the drive as if it were a venomous snake. He was trembling, caught between the institutional loyalty that had been drilled into him and the raw, screaming voice of his own conscience. They'll kill me. They're already killing you, Marcus said. They're just doing it slowly. He took another step, closing the distance between them until he was standing directly in front of the younger officer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. What would your sister want you to do? That was the question that broke him. Tanaka let out a choked sob, a sound of pure anguish. His training, his fear, his career, it all shattered in that moment. He reached into the inner pocket of his uniform jacket, his hand shaking so badly he could barely grasp the tiny micro SD card hidden there. He had copied the files in a cold sweat in the precinct locker room, driven by a desperate, half-formed need to do something. He pressed the card into Marcus's outstretched hand. It's everything, he whispered. The video from Miller's camera, the audio from Cross's office, the original Aegis alert before he modified it. His shoulders slumped in defeat, but also in a strange, painful kind of relief. I don't want to die for this. Then don't, Marcus said, his fingers closing around the tiny piece of plastic that held the power to burn down an entire corrupt system. But don't live as if it didn't happen. Marcus turned to leave, melting back into the shadows. Wait, Tanaka called out, his voice hoarse. Marcus paused but didn't turn. Tanaka brought his hands up, his movements clumsy and hesitant, and signed the words, I'm sorry. Marcus stood for a long moment in the darkness. Then, without looking back, he spoke, his words echoing in the vast, empty space. She doesn't need your sorry. She needs your truth. He walked out into the night, leaving a broken man behind in the ruins of his own choices. In his hand, he held the weapon they had all forgotten about, the truth. And as he got into the waiting car where Ben was parked a block away, he looked at the SD card resting in his palm. He said 2 words to Maya through his earpiece. Begin upload. The video was just 89 seconds long. There was no introduction, no dramatic music, no voiceover. It began with the shaky, first-person perspective of Officer Miller's body camera. The lens pointed at the sun-drenched steps of the Sterling Creek Community Library. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of his breathing and the distant chirp of birds. Then, Ava Ellis walked into the frame. She was a small splash of color against the gray concrete, her blue t-shirt bright, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She was holding her copy of The Little Prince. She sat down on the top step, opened the book, and began to read. Her lips didn't move. Instead, her hands began to dance. The camera zoomed in slightly. Her fingers moved with a fluid, innocent grace, not just forming signs, but painting a story in the air. She was completely absorbed, her face a mask of concentration and quiet joy. She was in her own world, a world of asteroids and roses and talking foxes. Maya, watching the raw footage with Marcus and Ben, had brought in a professional ASL interpreter via a secure video link. The interpreter watched the clip, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to stunned silence. My God, she whispered, her own hands trembling slightly. She's not just signing. She's quoting the book, verbatim. She paused the video, her eyes wide. Right there, she's signing the fox's secret. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. The video continued. Ava finished the passage, a small, satisfied smile on her face. She closed the book, but as she stood up to leave, it slipped from her grasp, tumbling down the steps. She let out a small, inaudible gasp and hurried after it. As she bent to pick it up, Officer Vance's voice shattered the peace, distorted and aggressive through the body cam's microphone. "Stop moving. Show me your hands." Ava looked up, startled. Her hands, which were already up and open as she reached for her book, froze in midair. Confusion clouded her features. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the anger in the officer's posture. She did what her mother had taught her to do when confronted by someone who didn't understand. She tried to explain. Her hands moved, forming a question. "What's wrong?" Then, remembering the book in her hand, she began to sign the most famous line from the story, a universal request of innocence and imagination. "Please draw me a sheep." The shot came before she could finish the last sign. The impact threw her backward. The book flew from her hand. The video ended with a frantic, blurry view of the pavement as Officer Miller rushed forward, his curses lost in the rising chaos. Maya didn't release the video to the public directly. That would be too easy to dismiss as vigilante justice. Instead, she followed a precise, calculated strategy. She packaged the video file, the unedited Aegis alert, and a brief, anonymous text file explaining the context. She then sent this package from a heavily encrypted, untraceable server to 3 specific targets. A Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist at the Washington Post known for taking on police corruption, a senior producer at a major international news network, and the lead counsel for the ACLU's Disability Rights Program. She gave him a 1-hour exclusive. The story didn't break, it detonated. The Washington Post was the first to publish, with the headline, "Uncorrupted body cam footage shows 10-year-old deaf girl was signing from The Little Prince seconds before being shot by NC officer." Within minutes, the video was everywhere. It wasn't just a news story. It was a visceral, shared trauma. People watched it in horrified silence in their offices, on subways, in their living rooms. They saw not a threat, but a child. They heard not a justification, but an execution. The hashtags exploded across social media. Hashtag Mayans are not a threat went viral, a defiant roar from the disabled community and their allies. But it was the second hashtag that captured the world's heart. Hashtag Draw Me a Sheep became a global symbol of innocence betrayed. It started with a single tweet from a graphic artist in London, who posted a simple, heartbreaking sketch of a small girl with braids, holding a book with a single, crudely drawn sheep standing beside her. Within hours, the internet was flooded. Professional illustrators, amateur artists, and children with crayons all began drawing sheep. They drew them on protest signs, on city sidewalks in chalk, on digital canvases. A famous actor posted a video of himself, tears in his eyes, reading the passage from The Little Prince. A rock band projected an image of a sheep onto the side of their concert venue. The narrative that Captain Cross had so carefully constructed was not just broken. It was annihilated. The story was no longer about a non-compliant subject. It was about a little girl who had asked for a drawing of a sheep and had gotten a bullet instead. In Sterling Creek, the first protester arrived outside the mayor's office. He was a high school art teacher. He didn't shout. He didn't hold a sign with angry words. He just set up an easel on the sidewalk and began to paint a large, detailed portrait of a sheep on a green hill. Soon, he was joined by another person, then a dozen, then 100. They brought their own art supplies, their own drawings, their own quiet, unshakable rage. The lawn in front of City Hall began to transform into a sprawling, silent art gallery of grief and defiance. In his cold, sterile office, Captain Dominic Cross watched the news reports, his face pale. The system had failed. Not the Aegis protocol that had worked perfectly. The system of control, of narrative management, had failed. The truth was out, raw and undeniable. His phone rang. It was Mayor Vance. He answered, but before he could speak, he heard her voice, choked with a fury born of pure terror. "You told me this was contained, Dominic. You told me you had it under control." The video was leaked, he said, his own voice sounding hollow. "Fix it," she shrieked. "Fix it now, But he knew it was too late. The match had been lit. The house was already burning, and the ghost who started the fire was nowhere to be seen. The annual Sterling Creek Founders Gala was Mayor Diana Vance's crowning achievement. Held in the opulent ballroom of the city's most historic hotel, it was a night of glittering gowns, expensive champagne, and the quiet, self-congratulatory hum of the city's elite. It was a celebration of power, a carefully curated performance of civic pride and prosperity. For Mayor Vance, it was her stage. Tonight, however, the performance was strained. She moved through the crowd with a practiced smile plastered on her face, but her eyes were flinty with anxiety. The air was thick not with celebration, but with whispered conversations and the constant, accusatory glow of smartphones displaying the latest news alerts. The story of Ava Ellis was the uninvited guest at her party, a ghost haunting the festivities. Her husband, Richard Vance, the CEO of OmniGuard Solutions, stayed close to her side, his own face a mask of grim denial. They were a power couple, a united front, projecting an aura of untouchable confidence that was beginning to crack at the seams. "We need to get ahead of this," Richard hissed in her ear as they greeted a wealthy donor. "My board is in full-blown panic." "I'm handling it," Diana whispered back through a clenched smile. "Cross is preparing a statement. We're framing it as a tragic but necessary outcome of a new security initiative. We'll emphasize the officer's stress, the system's potential. No one is buying that, Diana. Not with that video out there." She needed a moment alone, a quiet space to breathe and think. Excusing herself, she made her way through the throng of guests toward the secluded corridor that led to the private powder rooms. The hallway was dimly lit, lined with portraits of the city's previous mayors, their oil-painted eyes staring down with silent judgment. She was halfway down the hall when a figure stepped out from a recessed doorway, blocking her path. He was dressed in the simple black uniform of the hotel's catering staff, but he wore it with an unnerving stillness that was anything but subservient. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone sharp with annoyance. The man looked up, and for the first time, she saw his face in the dim light. It was a face she didn't recognize, but one that radiated an intensity that made the air grow cold. It was Marcus Ellis. "I believe so, Mayor," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that seemed to absorb the sound around it. A flicker of fear shot through her. "This is a private event. Staff are not permitted in this area." She tried to step around him, but he didn't move. "You signed the order," he said. "It wasn't a question. You used the emergency protocol clause in the city charter to bypass the council. You buried the funding under the Public Schools Safety Initiative. Then you set up a shell corporation to handle the payments to OmniGuard, a corporation whose primary shareholder is your husband." Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling her carefully constructed reality. Her breath caught in her throat. The smile vanished. Who are you?" "I'm the man who built systems like Aegis before I realized what they would be used for," he said. He pulled a phone from his pocket. He didn't play a recording. He simply opened a file. It was an email, heavily encrypted, but displayed clearly on the screen. To Richard Vance Revance at OmniGuard Seoul. From Diana Vance Mayor at sterlingcreek.gov. Subject: Aegis Phase 2 funding. Body: Richard. The initial trial is proving volatile, but the data is promising. Once we weather this current media storm, I can move forward with the proposal to the City Pension Fund Board. If Aegis can demonstrate a measurable reduction in community instability factors by the end of the quarter, I can justify the investment. We just need to control the narrative. Her own words, sent from her private email account just 2 days ago. It was impossible. The server was air-gapped. The encryption was military grade. You're Jonas Harper," she whispered, the old NSA ghost story name coming to her lips. He didn't confirm it. He simply tilted the phone screen slightly, showing her a small, digital countdown timer in the corner of the screen. It was ticking down from 60 minutes. "That email, along with your complete, unredacted financial history and your husband's, is set to be delivered to the Department of Justice, the SEC, and the top 5 news agencies in the country when that timer hit 0. She stared at him, her mind racing, searching for an angle, a threat, a way out. I don't respond to blackmail. This isn't blackmail, Mayor, Marcus said, his eyes as cold and hard as granite. It's a courtesy, a choice. When you didn't give my daughter, he took a step back. You have 59 minutes to walk out of this party, get in your car, and drive to the nearest FBI field office to give a full confession. Or you can stay here, drink your champagne, and watch your entire world burn to the ground on live television. She tried to speak, to summon the authority and rage that had served her so well her entire life, but no words came out. He had her. He had everything. He turned and walked away, disappearing into a service corridor at the end of the hall as silently as he had appeared. He left her standing alone, surrounded by the ghosts of her ambition. The muffled sounds of the party, the laughter and the clinking glasses, suddenly sounded like a funeral dirge. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling. She had built her life on a foundation of carefully managed lies, and a ghost in a waiter's uniform had just pulled the cornerstone. The entire structure was about to come crashing down. Panic is a poor strategist. Mayor Diana Vance didn't go to the FBI. She ran. She found her husband in the ballroom, grabbed his arm with a grip of iron, and hissed 2 words in his ear. It's over. The carefully constructed masks they wore shattered. They fled their own party, leaving a wake of confused murmurs and concerned glances. Their destination was a small, private airfield 30 miles outside the city limits. A sleek Gulfstream jet was waiting, fueled, and ready. Its flight plan was filed for a small, private island in the Caribbean, a sunny haven with no extradition treaty with the United States. Captain Dominic Cross was already there, pacing nervously on the tarmac, his face pale and slick with sweat. He had received a one-word text from the mayor: run. The 3 of them scrambled up the steps of the jet, a trio of disgraced architects trying to escape the collapse of their own creation. Get us in the air now. Diana snapped at the pilot. The engines whined, spooling up for takeoff. For a fleeting moment, they felt a surge of relief. They were going to make it. They were going to get away. They didn't hear the engines power down. They didn't see the dark, armored vehicles gliding across the tarmac without headlights, surrounding the jet in a silent, deadly embrace. But they did hear the voice, amplified, unmistakable, and utterly final. This is the U.S. Department of Justice. Step away from the aircraft with your hands in the air. You are under arrest. Floodlights erupted from all sides, bathing the jet and the surrounding tarmac in a light as harsh and unforgiving as the truth. The doors of the armored vehicles burst open, and a team of heavily armed federal agents swarmed the plane. Diana Vance froze, her mouth agape in a silent scream. Dominic Cross tried to turn, to run, but 2 agents were already on him, forcing him to the ground with brutal efficiency. Richard Vance, the architect of the Aegis Protocol, actually made a run for it. He didn't get far. A perfectly executed tackle sent him sprawling onto the asphalt. His expensive leather briefcase skidded across the ground, bursting open and spilling its contents. Non-disclosure agreements, sealed contracts, and profit projections, like the broken promises they were. Marcus Ellis watched the entire scene unfold on a secure, live feed in a quiet, windowless room. It was a small, sterile space, but it felt like the center of the universe. Maya sat beside him, her fingers dancing across a keyboard, monitoring the digital fallout. Ben stood behind them, a silent, satisfied guardian. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't feel triumph. He just felt a quiet, profound sense of an equation being solved, of a debt being paid. He had turned their own systems against them. The jet's location was tracked via a GPS spoofer he'd had been planted on the mayor's car. Their panic communications were intercepted through a backdoor Maya had opened in the city's network. He had delivered the entire package, the evidence, their escape plan, their exact location, to a single, trusted contact at the Department of Justice, a deputy director who owed him a life debt from a mission in Kabul years ago. The system of justice, so often slow and blind, had moved with the speed and precision of a surgical strike, because he had guided the scalpel. As the agents led the 3 of them away in handcuffs, their faces illuminated by the flashing lights of the federal vehicles. Marcus closed the laptop. The takedown was complete. He stood up and walked out of the room, down the quiet, sterile hallway of the hospital. He pushed open the door to ICU room 4. The room was bathed in the soft, pre-dawn light filtering through the window. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was the same, but something was different. A nurse was standing by the bed, smiling, and Ava was awake. Her eyes were open, a little unfocused, but they were open. They found his as he walked toward the bed. He sank into the chair beside her, his body suddenly feeling the weight of the past 3 days. He took her hand in his. It was warm. For the first time in days, her fingers gripped his back. She couldn't speak yet. The trauma and the medication had silenced her. But she didn't have to. Her eyes said everything. He bent low, resting his forehead briefly against hers. A silent communion of father and daughter who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. Her other hand, the one not holding his, lifted slowly, deliberately, every movement an act of supreme effort. With a single, trembling finger, she traced 3 letters onto the back of his hand. DAD. A sound escaped Marcus's throat, a raw, ragged sob that he had held back for years. The ghost, the soldier, the architect of vengeance, dissolved in that moment, leaving only a father. The tears he thought he'd lost the ability to shed streamed down his face. On the small television mounted in the corner of the room, the local news was showing live footage from the airfield. A reporter was talking breathlessly about the stunning, high-level arrests. The face of Mayor Diana Vance, contorted in a mask of rage and disbelief, filled the screen as she was pushed into the back of a federal vehicle. In the hospital room, Marcus held his daughter's hand, feeling the first warmth of a new day. The revenge was over. But the real fight, the fight for a world that would see his daughter, not as a threat, but as the miracle she was, had just begun. Revenge is a fire that burns itself out. Justice is a seed that, once planted, can grow a forest. Marcus hadn't just torn down a corrupt system. He had cleared the ground for something new. He launched it 2 weeks after Ava was discharged from the hospital, while the nation was still reeling from the Sterling Creek scandal. He called it the Ellis Project. The website was stark, simple, and powerful. No flashy graphics, no corporate branding. Just a clean, white background with a single line of text at the top in bold, black letters. They tried to silence one voice. Now, they will hear us all. It was a platform for families with disabled children, particularly black, brown, and indigenous children, to share their stories. Stories of profiling, of wrongful arrest, of being labeled a threat by systems too blind or too arrogant to care. Every submission was verified by a small, dedicated team of volunteers, retired journalists, paralegals, and data analysts, then anonymized and displayed on a digital map of the United States. Each pin that appeared on the map marked a place where a child's humanity had been questioned, where their disability had been criminalized. The first story came from a mother in St. Louis. Her son, who had cerebral palsy, had been frisked and thrown against a police car outside a grocery store for suspicious body language. A second came from a father in Florida. His daughter, who was on the autism spectrum, had been suspended from school for disrespect after having a meltdown in class because of sensory overload. A third came from a 17-year-old in Arizona who was deaf. "I'm not angry," he wrote. "I'm just exhausted from having to prove I'm not a threat every single day of my life." Within a week, the Ellis Project had over 10,000 submissions. The map glowed with a constellation of silent screams. But the project did more than just collect stories. Using an AI Marcus had designed, a tool for justice, not oppression, the platform analyzed the data, identified patterns of systemic abuse, and automatically matched families with legal aid resources, civil rights organizations, and local support groups. It didn't just give them a voice, it gave them weapons. Schools began to contact them, asking for training modules on how to interact with disabled students. Civil rights organizations requested access to the data to build federal lawsuits. Pediatricians started sharing the site with their patients' families. The platform didn't go viral in the way a meme does. It went necessary. But the most powerful voice was yet to be heard. The live stream began without fanfare. The setting wasn't a cold hospital room, but the warm, book-lined study of their new, undisclosed home. Ava sat in a comfortable armchair, a soft blanket draped over her lap. She looked small but not fragile. There was a new strength in her eyes, a wisdom that no 10-year-old should ever have to possess. Marcus stood behind the camera, a silent, steady presence. Maya monitored the streams back in from a laptop, while Ben stood guard just outside the door. "You sure about this, Starlight?" Marcus had asked her gently just before they went live. She had looked at him and nodded, then signed with a fierce determination. "Let them see me." And then she began. There was no music, no fancy intro, just silence, then movement. Her fingers lifted, clear and slow, each sign precise, each gesture imbued with the weight of lived truth. For the hearing viewers, a soft, unobtrusive voiceover was provided by a certified ASL interpreter. But it wasn't the voice they were listening to. It was Ava's hands. "I am not dangerous," the sign said, the interpreter's voice a quiet echo. The signs themselves cut through the screen, sharper than any sound. "I'm just different." And being different was enough to make them afraid. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air, a deliberate, powerful choice. It held weight. They saw my hands moving, and they thought it was a threat. They saw a body they didn't understand, and they thought it meant violence. My body became a problem just for speaking the only way I know how. Across the country, and then the world, the live stream pulsed. The viewer count, which Maya was tracking, climbed with dizzying speed. At first, it was thousands, then tens of thousands, then millions. People shared the link with a simple, urgent command. "Watch this." They didn't just shoot at me. Ava's hands continued, her expression serious, her gaze fixed directly on the camera lens. She held her palm over her chest, over the place where the scar was hidden beneath her sweater. They shot at the idea that someone like me could exist without having to apologize for it. Marcus stood behind the camera, his jaw tight, his knuckles white as he gripped the tripod. He was holding back a flood of tears. This was his daughter, his brave, brilliant daughter, turning her deepest trauma into a global classroom. Then came the moment that no one expected. Ava lifted both hands, her movements becoming stronger, more passionate. One hand signed the word hope, the other, the word rage. They taught me that my hands were suspicious. But what they didn't know is that my hands carry stories. My hands carry my ancestors. My hands carry the fire. Ben, watching over Maya's shoulder, let out a low whistle. 6 million, Marcus, he whispered. 6 million viewers. And it's still climbing. By the end of the hour-long stream, the number had surpassed 12 million. Not all the comments were kind, but none could ignore what they had seen. The ripple effect was immediate and profound. School boards in Massachusetts, Texas, and Oregon announced new funding for elective classes in American Sign Language within days. Universities followed suit. Libraries across the country updated their accessibility programming. Parents filmed themselves learning how to sign, "I love you," and posted it online. Teenagers began tagging hashtag "My hands are not a threat" under their selfies, their TikToks, their school projects. Then came the message that broke Marcus's carefully controlled composure. A father in Arizona posted a comment on the Ellis Project's forum. He shared a picture of his 7-year-old son, who was autistic and largely nonverbal, staring at a tablet screen with wide, transfixed eyes. The caption read, "My boy barely speaks. He avoids looking at people, but he watched your daughter's entire stream without looking away once. When it was over, he turned to me and said, 'If she can live, maybe I can be trusted, too.'" Marcus printed that message and had it framed. He placed it on the bookshelf in Ava's room, right next to her copy of The Little Prince. "You just rewrote the rules, kiddo," Maya told Ava later that evening via video call. Ava smiled faintly, then signed her reply. "No, we just reminded them of the people they forgot to write the rules for." Later that night, the White House issued a press release condemning the use of AI-driven behavioral profiling on disabled children. The FBI's Civil Rights Division announced it was opening new investigations into pattern and practice violations in multiple states. Brock, Cross, and Vance were indicted on a slew of federal conspiracy charges. But that wasn't what changed the world. What changed the world was a 10-year-old girl with a bullet scar on her shoulder, a fire in her heart, and a language that didn't need sound to burn through silence. Because silence had stopped meaning surrender. Now it meant resistance. The courtroom wasn't quiet. It was silent. It was not the silence of respect or order, but the heavy, expectant silence of a nation holding its breath. Cameras lined the back wall, their red lights like unblinking eyes. Reporters filled every pew, their pens poised. Activists leaned forward on the edge of their seats, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and weariness. The world was watching, not just with its eyes, but with a conscience that had been sharpened to a razor's edge. And at the center of it all sat Ava Ellis. She didn't walk into the courtroom. She was rolled in, her wheelchair moving slowly down the center aisle, expertly navigated by her father. Her posture was upright, her presence unshakable. She wore a simple dark blue dress. There was no makeup, no pretense. She was not there to perform. She was there to bear witness. Across the courtroom, flanked by two expensive lawyers who looked as if they'd aged a decade in the past few months, sat former Officer Nolan Vance. He was pale and shrunken, a man hollowed out by the consequences of his own actions. The badge was long gone. The bravado was gone. All that was left was a husk of fear. The judge called the court to order, but the real trial had already happened in the court of public opinion. This was just the sentencing. The prosecution began, not with words, but with sound. A recording crackled to life, filling the silent courtroom with Captain Cross's cold, paranoid voice, taken from the evidence Marcus had provided. She moves her hands too much. The system flags her. I don't care what the scanner says. Those types always have something to hide. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Then came Officer Tanaka's testimony. His voice trembled, but it was firm as he spoke from the witness stand. I told Officer Vance she was likely deaf. I told him her gestures looked like signing. He told me to mind my own business. Screens lit up with the logs from the Aegis protocol, reconstructed by a team of civil tech experts from MIT. The system had flagged Ava not for carrying a weapon, not for making a threat, but for unusual kinetic behavior. The criteria were listed in cold, clinical text: repetitive hand motion, non-standard gesture patterns, deviation from baseline pedestrian locomotion. The very things that defined a deaf child's way of being in the world. Marcus sat in the back row, Maya beside him. Ben stood near the doors, a mountain of quiet reassurance. Then, it was Ava's turn. The prosecutor announced that the victim would now give her statement. But Ava didn't move toward the witness stand. Instead, her lawyer, a sharp, determined woman from the ACLU, dimmed the courtroom lights and turned on a large monitor. "Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing with clarity, "Ms. Ellis will give her statement in the language in which she is most fluent." The livestream video began to play. The courtroom was filled with the image of Ava, sitting in her book-lined study, her hands beginning their powerful, silent dance. "I'm not dangerous." The jury watched, transfixed. The judge watched, his expression unreadable. Nolan Vance stared at the floor, unable to look at the face of the girl whose life he had shattered. The video played in its entirety. When it ended, the courtroom was left in a profound, echoing silence. No cross-examination could refute it. No legal argument could diminish its power. The defense tried. They claimed Vance was a victim of a flawed system, that he was under stress, that the AI had let him down. But the prosecution had one final, devastating piece of evidence. An internal OmniGuard email, unearthed by Maya, sent from a software developer to Richard Vance. The line was highlighted on the screen in bright red during the closing arguments. Per client request, Sterling Creek PD, high-frequency sign language style movements are to be weighted as equivalent to potential gang signaling. This will increase the threat level response accordingly. It was written like a line of code, a formula for turning a child's language into a death sentence. The verdict was a formality. Vance was found guilty on all counts: aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, and violation of civil rights. Chief Cross, Mayor Vance, and her husband faced a separate, more complex federal trial that would see them all convicted for conspiracy, fraud, and a host of other charges that would send them to prison for years. Within 48 hours of the verdict, 3 states announced the immediate suspension of all contracts with OmniGuard. 2 others initiated internal audits of their own predictive policing programs. Lawsuits were filed, congressional hearings began, and a new piece of legislation was drafted. Ava's Act, a bill to prevent AI-based profiling of disabled citizens and mandate national standard for law enforcement training. But none of that could undo what was done. After the trial, as reporters swarmed the steps of the courthouse, Marcus guided Ava out a back exit. They didn't need the spotlight. They had something louder: impact. As they reached their waiting van, a small group of high school students stood nearby, quietly signing in unison. "We see you." Ava turned, a small, tired smile gracing her lips. Her hands moved in a slow, deliberate reply. "Keep watching." That night, Marcus finally spoke to the press. Just once. He stood before a single microphone, not as a ghost from the NSA, not as a man who had sought and achieved a terrible revenge, but as a father. "My daughter didn't need to scream to be heard," he said, his voice steady, carrying across the airwaves to millions. "All she needed was for us to be willing to stop pretending that silence is empty. Justice doesn't need to roar. It only needs enough of us to stop turning away." The message went viral. So did the Ellis Project. 1 week after the verdict, Ava returned to her live stream. This time, she wasn't alone. A dozen other children joined her, a vibrant, diverse group. Some were deaf, some were on the spectrum, some had limbs that moved differently, voices that sounded different. Together, they signed a single, powerful message: "We are not a glitch in your system." The comments poured in. One stood out, pinned to the top by Maya's team. "I never knew your name before this. But now, when I teach my daughter ASL, I start with Ava. Because heroes don't need capes. Sometimes they just need hands that won't stop moving." The story ends, but it doesn't. It continues in every classroom that adds an ASL course, in every police department that revamps its training, in every parent who learns to listen with their heart. So to everyone watching this, don't just scroll past. Share the story. Learn a new way to listen. See with more than just your eyes. And if you believe in stories like Ava's, if you believe that silence is meant to be broken, subscribe. Your story matters. Share it in the comments below, but please remember to comment with respect, because every voice deserves to be heard. Some stories were never meant to be whispered. They were meant to change the world.